Hey guys, how you doing? Happy holidays to you. Welcome to another Intrepid Adventures, Intrepid's free live programming, coming to you from the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, located in New York City in Midtown, right up on the Hudson River. Um, Once again, this is a free broadcast, a live program, but doesn't come without cost to the museum. So if you would like to support us, please do think about clicking the link in the chat or in the description. So, guys, 80 years ago, Tuesday, this past Tuesday, was the day that will live in infamy, right? It was the 80th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attacks. So today we have a very special Intrepid Adventures for you. We're going to talk about this event through the lens of three distinct stories, okay? Little known and little heard stories. So this should be interesting for you. But just in case, as a refresher, that is the Intrepid Museum. And the Intrepid Museum is a floating museum. There you go, a little bit better for you. Um, it opened in 1982 to the public. It is open 7 days a week again for you to visit at your leisure, open from 10 to 5. It's a pretty big place if that's what you're thinking. The Intrepid, as it sits there next to its pier, is 6 stories high. But if you took Intrepid and you made it to a headstand on its bow, it would rise 913 feet into the air. And that is as big as some of the buildings here, some of the skyscrapers, even here in Manhattan, in New York City. Intrepid entered service in 1943. It was commissioned on August 16th, 1943. It served through the rest of World War II. It played a pivotal role in the Cold War, in the space race as well, and it served 3 tours of 6 months long in the Vietnam War as well before being decommissioned in 1974. Okay, so that's your little background about the Intrepid, but let's get right into the meat and potatoes, if you will, of today's presentation. It's called Stories from Pearl Harbor. And guys, on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Empire their aim was to wipe out the US Pacific Fleet, or at the very least, reduce it to a smaller size, a small enough size that it would be no threat to their plans of conquering the Pacific region, right? One day later, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asks Congress to declare war, calling it a day that will live in infamy. But as you see here, let me zoom in a little bit for you. This is a #1 draft, a first draft written by the president himself. And you can see corrections made in his own hand. And I'm not sure if you can see, but in that first line there, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. You can see what he originally crossed out. At least I hope you can see that. It says world history. He would later, of course, cross that out in favor of infamy, and I think that makes um, a much deeper impact. Okay. This declaration brings the US into the war, decisively tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. Now, Pearl Harbor would equally be important as a cultural symbol. The phrase, "Remember Pearl Harbor," becomes a rallying cry of a generation. 80 years later, politicians, military officers, and historians still use it as an appeal to, quote, never forget, or as a promise of never again. Let's get to our first story, guys. Our first story is called One Man and His Crane. Now, in this overhead view map, we see the 7 US battleships arranged in what was called Battleship Row, okay, right here off of Ford Island, with one of them, the Pennsylvania, down here in dry dock, along with the destroyers, the Cassine and the Downs. In this aerial view, we get a better look at the Pennsylvania right back over here, okay, and the destroyers. Now, George Walters was a 37-year-old civilian dock worker employed with Pearl Harbor Shipyard who worked as a clown entertaining sick children in his spare time. On the morning of the 7th, he was operating a crane, just like the one you see here in the picture, and that crane was working on the battleship Pennsylvania. George all of a sudden would see planes over Pearl Harbor, and he thought it was a little early on a Sunday morning to do a drill, but nonetheless could only be a drill. He continued with that line of thinking until he started seeing planes getting destroyed on the ground. Now, with one look down, he realized that the men on board the Pennsylvania were unaware of what was happening. He stepped out of his control booth towards the outside railing and yelled down at them, but they couldn't hear him. Finally, George takes a big wrench and throws it down at the Pennsylvania, and this only makes the men angry. He does get their attention, but it only makes her angry. Who's this crazy guy throwing stuff down at us? Realizing he's not going to do much good outside of his control room, George gets into his crane control room, starts to swing the crane back and forth over the Pennsylvania. And what he's trying to do here, guys, is he's trying to ward off the enemy planes. Now, the sailors realize that something's going on when they see the planes flying overhead, and they jump to their anti-aircraft guns. And at first they think George is just getting in the way. Who's this guy swinging this crazy crane arm over us, just getting in our way? Until they realize that whatever direction George aimed his crane arm in, seconds later, a Japanese enemy plane would fly overhead. So they started working together and realizing that George was actually acting as a makeshift gun spotter. So together, working in this fashion, the crew of the Pennsylvania and George destroy at least 10 enemy planes that went to attack the Pennsylvania, with one getting caught up in the wires that you can see there. However, a 500-pound bomb narrowly misses George's crane and explodes. Now, this blows out the glass of his control room and dazes George so much that he starts stumbling out of his control room and stumbling around the outside railings of the outside deck there of the crane. Right? Now, an officer running by on the deck realizes this and realizes that something's wrong. He climbs up the crane's ladder, and at the very last minute, he tackles George back into his control room. All right. Now, the results of this attack are obvious. You can see in the foreground, the destroyers, the Cassine and the Downs, are completely destroyed. However, the Pennsylvania is virtually undamaged. It is hit by one bomb, which kills several of its sailors, but within a few weeks, the Pennsylvania is ready to go and is steaming towards California to defend the West Coast against a possible invasion of the homeland, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to go back one frame there. Let's pause and see if there's any questions. You have any questions right out of the gun here, guys? What happened to George Walters? Okay, good question. So after he was tackled, like a football tackle, I wonder if the officer was a football player, like many of the sailors were at the time, actually into his control room. George Walters woke up a few hours later in a hospital with absolutely no memory of what happened. His memory would slowly but surely come back over the next years, but he did continue working at Pearl Harbor once he was healed up for another 25 years. George Walters wound up passing away at the age of 95 in March 1999, and he is remembered as only one of the many civilian heroes of that day. All right. Okay, good question. Good question. Let's go on to our second story, and I kind of gave it away a little bit before. This is the lost battleships myth. Okay. Now, the myth is, or popular belief is, that all of the U.S. battleships were lost as a result of the attack on that day. However, as you can see, besides the Pennsylvania, once again located down here in the dry dock, you can see the Maryland right here, and you can see the Tennessee right here, are going to escape only lightly damaged because they were protected from torpedo attacks by the other ships that you can see right down here, the Oklahoma and the West Virginia. Okay. The Arizona, however, a completely different story. The bomb penetrated, it was hit by a bomb, was penetrated the deck into the powder magazine. The explosion breaks the ship literally in half, sinking her along with the 1,177 sailors that were on board. Okay, the Arizona is still to this day at the bottom of the harbor there. Now, what happened to the other ships? Now, the Oklahoma would eventually capsize and go bottom up, like you see here in the frame, taking 429 men down with her. The Oklahoma would eventually be scrapped over the next 5 years. But 3 more ships, the California, the West Virginia, and the Nevada, would be sunk but wouldn't stay sunk. Now, the California and the West Virginia were hit by torpedoes at their moorings, and due to the slow rate of sinking and the efforts of the crew to countersink compartments, the ships sunk out upright with much of the hull still above water. Now, the Nevada, let's see, now the Nevada was a little bit of a different story. Due to a training exercise, one of the boilers on board the Nevada, and there were 14 on board of a battleship of that class, was actually lit because of an early Sunday morning training exercise. You see, guys, normally it would take a battleship from a cold start to getting underway. It would take a couple of hours to get all those boilers up to steam, as it were, right? But because they had one boiler already lit, the Nevada was able to get moving, and it started moving towards the mouth of Pearl Harbor to defend against a possible invasion of the harbor itself, a sea invasion by Japanese ships. Now, seeing this, the Japanese torpedo bombers and dive bombers saw their opportunity, and they started targeting the Nevada in an effort to sink it in the harbor mouth. If they could sink this battleship in Pearl Harbor's mouth, it could seal up that harbor as a useful naval base for the United States for years to come. Now, noticing this, the captain in Nevada intentionally ran the Nevada aground to prevent them from being sunk in the mouth of the harbor. They would be hit by several dive bombers, but they were already in shallow water. So the sinking, and again, countersinking by the damage control crew on board, didn't do too much damage. And so the Nevada wouldn't be too much of a project. Now, these three would be sunk, but they weren't in such bad condition, as you're probably getting the clue, and wouldn't stay sunk for long. What would begin would be the largest maritime salvage effort in U.S. history, and all three were refloated. Now, huge steel and wooden patches were constructed. They would be bolted to the sides of the ships, and the water slowly pumped out. Now, the West Virginia was the hardest, requiring 5,000 dives and 20,000 hours underwater to refloat. But in 1944, the California and the West Virginia fought in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest and most complicated naval battle in history. Also, by the way, the last battleship on battleship combat that the world would see before the aircraft carrier took over naval operations. The Nevada would be present at D-Day in the English Channel, using her guns to bombard the beaches of Normandy, while Allied troops stormed the beaches, attacking Hitler's European wall. That's the end of our second story, folks. Are there any questions at the end of the second story? We'll just pause and take another question. Any question? What happened to the USS Utah? We have some eagle-eyed people out there. Okay, thank you for being a good observant. Let's go back to the map here, this kind of aerial view of Pearl Harbor. Here's the Utah right there. Okay, so that little ship there, the Utah. The Utah was actually a pre-World War I battleship, so very old, even at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack. It was used for training and was supposed to be demolished. However, instead of wasting a good ship, she was demilitarized and turned into a target ship. Unfortunately, the only ones to target her were the Japanese. Although she wasn't a military ship at the time, and special effort was made by the Japanese commanders to inform the Japanese pilots that which should not be a target at that time. It was targeted by some Japanese torpedo bombers and sank in as little as 12 minutes, taking as many as 58 men down with her. However, in this attack, they did use up several valuable torpedoes that could have been used on other ships. Okay, and actually, if you, for those of you who've been to the Arizona Memorial, you might have visited the USS Utah Memorial as well, because you can go see that memorial among the many military memorials that are there at Pearl Harbor to this day. Okay, very good question. Eagle eyes there. Let's move on to our third story today. Speaking of the Arizona Memorial, now, from the moment the smoke cleared, the remains of the Arizona became an enduring symbol in American culture. Nearly half of the Americans killed that day at Pearl Harbor, over 2,400 total, 1,177 died on board, including 23 sets of brothers and one father and son combination. This was the largest single loss of life aboard a ship in U.S. naval history. The Arizona remains as a very real reminder of what happened that Sunday morning and what every man would be fighting for from then on for the rest of the war. Now, an original crew member on the Intrepid, his name was Ray Stone. I want to share a little bit about his book that he wrote about his experiences on the Intrepid. Now, a tradition in the Navy that harkens back to the old days of the big sailing ships, right? The big wooden sailing ships. If you are a member of the very first crew of a ship, you would be rewarded by giving a plank. Hence, you would be known as a plank owner, given a piece of the actual wooden planks that the ship was made from. This had been carried forth in naval tradition, and even today, it still has meaning, although our ships are no longer made of wood, of course. So Ray Stone, an original member of the original crew here on Intrepid, was indeed a plank owner. And in his book called My Ship, he's going to share a little bit about his experiences on January 5th, 1944, sailing aboard the Intrepid into Pearl Harbor, getting ready to receive their first permanent air group and getting ready to, get prepared to ship out into combat against the Japanese. I'm going to share a little bit of a segment about his book with you guys. Quote, those of us looking down on the Arizona from the edge of the flight deck stood wrapped in solemn silence, thinking about the brave men who lost their lives defending their ship. The magnitude of these reflective moments was amplified at sunset by the lonely notes of a bugler sounding taps as the ship's flag was slowly lowered on the dockside mast. Amidst those thoughts of the 1,177 Arizona's men killed that Sunday morning, I felt a surge of anger and resolve to avenge, to get even, to kick, and I'll use the word butt because this is a family show. Again, Ray Stone from his book in 2003. Right? Before long, questions about what to do with the Arizona surfaced. And in 1958, this guy, President Eisenhower, would authorize the construction of a permanent memorial paid for in part by this guy, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, in one of his, actually several of his many famous Hawaii concerts, okay, helped pay for the memorial, which opened in 1962. Now, part of what makes this such a sacred place is that it is still to this day an active military cemetery. Since 1980, nearly 40 of the 334 survivors from Pearl Harbor, from the Arizona, had chosen to be interned there, with not very many left. Now, manning the rails is another military tradition, usually reserved for heads of state, where a crew of a ship, upon sailing past a national monument, a platform housing a head of state or something, would show their respect by coming to the deck of that ship and manning the rails surrounding that ship's upper deck. Okay. They would be assembled in full dress, of course, full dress uniforms. This practice has been adopted by the Navy, Coast Guard, Merchant Marines, and even Allied navies as they sail into Pearl Harbor, passing the wreckage of the Arizona. Preserved in a state of arrested decay for 74 years, with some of the wreckage above the water, one of the most powerful elements of the memorial wasn't even planned. A 74-year oil leak has brought 8 to 9 quarts of oil to the surface each day, and during World War II, sailors began calling it the Black Tears of the Arizona, and the name stuck. In the 1990s, environmentalists began calling it to be permanently sealed, fearing a complete rupture of the tank, causing a total disaster. However, the National Park Service monitors the leak and continues to do so, and stands firm on allowing the tears to flow from what it calls a war grave. It is estimated that it could go on for decades because of the amount of oil that should have been aboard the Arizona that Sunday morning. But legend says that it will stop on the day that the last Arizona survivor passes on. Now, many of you listening may have been to the Arizona Memorial. I certainly have. And if you've gone to the memorial, you'll recognize this place here. This is the memorial wall inside the Battleship Memorial. Okay. Inscribed on this wall are the 1,177 sailors, but I do want to draw your attention down to the lower right-hand corner here, okay? That is the area where the 88 Marines that were stationed on board the USS Arizona are enshrined as well, okay? And I do want to draw your attention, let me see if I can get it a little bit bigger for you, to the 9th name on this list there. If you can read that there, I'm circling it with my laser pointer. That is the name of B.L. Bond, okay? He was one of the 88 Marines there. He's from Wiggins County, Mississippi. There he is right there. He was a corporal serving on board the Arizona on that day. Now, many traditions abound in the military in general, but especially with Marines. Again, another look backward to the days of the big old whaling ships when they needed to hunt whales for oil and things like that. These bigger ships would usually carry smaller longboats alongside, and the men would go in there and row out to where they saw the whales with harpoons in hopes of harpooning a whale. Well, they needed the whale for oil back then. They no longer needed it by the time of World War II, but they still had these longboats on board, and they would just be used to ferry dignitaries and high-ranking officers from the ship to the land, to the shore, and back again. Okay, but while they weren't being used for that official purpose, they were being used for another purpose. Now, Marines, so I'm told, will make a competition out of just about anything. So they had whaleboat races. Of course they did. Okay. So what you're seeing here in the picture is the USS Arizona whaleboat team. Okay. And I'm told that it was a championship whaleboating team. The USS Arizona team of Marines won 15 of 16 whaleboat races. Okay. Corporal B.L. Bernice L. Bond from Wiggins County, Mississippi, still lies down there today, the bottom of the water, with the other 87 Marines in his company. He will be awarded posthumously the Purple Heart. Okay, and guys, there's a very personal connection with yours truly to the events of that day. Corporal Bernice L. Bonds from Wiggins County, Mississippi. It's my great uncle, right? My great uncle. Okay, guys, the Japanese surrender officially on September 2nd, 1945, officially ending World War II around the world. The ceremony, as you see here in the picture, will be taken aboard the USS Missouri. And one of the signatories, as you can see down there, was General Douglas MacArthur. Okay. The USS Missouri would be retired in 1992 and brought to Pearl Harbor as a museum ship in 1999. Now, this had a very big educational appeal. Many other war museums are there, as you know, if you've been there. And visitors can visit the site in one day where the war both started for the US and ended for the United States, again, within one single day, right? Veterans groups, however, and the National Park Service had serious concerns that the Missouri, a symbol of triumph and victory, will overshadow the Arizona Memorial, which is a symbol of national tragedy. Celebratory atmospheres, such as events that they would have often on the aft deck of the Missouri, would be disrespectful for those buried inside the Arizona. However, the position of the Missouri would be carefully chosen. It would be far enough away from the Arizona and positioned so that the events on the aft deck would not be heard or seen from the memorial. And furthermore, the Missouri would be given one final mission, and that is to stand guard over her fallen sister. Right? So guys, that is our 3 stories of the day. I hope you enjoyed those stories. We're going to take one final question, if there are any questions. Oh, how many survivors from the Arizona left? Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question. I kind of alluded to it before that there aren't many left. Over 2,400 Americans were killed on that day. 1,177 of them on board the Arizona. That doesn't include the 88 Marines of the Arizona. There were 334 that survived the attack on that day. But as of last month, as of November 22nd, 2021, there's only two left, guys. Only two left. Now, both are about 100 years old. They are Ken Potts and Lou Cantor. Both plan to be buried rather than being interred on the Arizona Memorial with their former shipmates. Okay, that's an excellent question. Let me give you some quick facts about the Arizona before we leave you for the day. The Arizona served as a gunnery ship in World War One, and on December 13th, 1918, the Arizona assisted the convoy that escorted President Woodrow Wilson to sign the Paris Peace Treaty, okay, ending World War One. The Arizona aided in the recovery after the 1933 earthquake that hit Long Beach, California. Pardon me. And in 1986, the Navy created the USS Arizona Memorial Trophy in honor of the USS Arizona and her lost crewmen. You see, guys, every 2 years, the Navy chooses a ship that has demonstrated the highest level of combat readiness. That ship will be awarded the Arizona Memorial Trophy. Okay. Okay, guys, that does bring our short adventure here to a close. Please continue to tag us in your social media posts. Take a tour of the Intrepid, a virtual tour of the Intrepid, by seeing our arts and culture page on Google. Okay, and don't forget to check in next Thursday when Alicia will be with you once again for our program that day titled Biome Away from Home. Okay, guys. Okay, and if you still have questions, just feel free to email us, and don't forget to tag us in your social media posts. Okay, guys. I'm going to try to get to you. There we go. So I'm still getting the hang of these buttons. I hope you enjoyed that presentation today. Once again, happy holidays, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.